movies today are the same as like telling stories around a campfire.
Welcome to Story Power, a new bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. And we'll give a few recommendations to you, our listeners. Beware possible spoilers ahead. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. And as all good stories do, the world got even crazier. But as Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. Since I believe that stories have the power to show us the way and give us courage to keep going, I wanted to see if that was true for my guests as well. You're listening to episode number 9. My guest today is Trevor Valenzuela. Trevor, welcome
Hello.
to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to say you and I met, I think, when you took my acting class. I have several students who have been on this podcast, and that's how we've met. But I know that you are a podcaster, so I wanted you to tell about your podcast, Caps Off with John and Trevor. Tell a little bit about your podcast.
Caps Off is probably the biggest passion project I have, and I only say that because I never hate doing it. There's no part of it that I dislike, and I met John. He's the co-host, and it's a comedic podcast. You know, we rarely sit down and have like a serious conversation about where we want to go and what we want to do in life, and we try to keep it a little light. And we're still kind of finding our footing. But I met John working at Domino's, and before him, I had never listened to a podcast in my life. And he was like, "I think you should. I think you'd really enjoy them." And then from there, I started listening to podcasts whenever I would close there. And then he was like, "Well, I want to start one. I want to start one with you." And I was on board, and there's been no downsides. So it's on YouTube. We're at the time of recording, we're getting ready to move to Apple Podcasts and Spotify, because we're starting to get a little more people who are like, yeah, we want to listen to it, but we don't want to listen to it and have to keep an app open all the time. So we figured it might be worth the hassle.
Yeah, that's exciting, because I feel I'm going to go back to what you said. I feel the same way. This is like my 9th chat for Story Power, and I love it. I even love the editing part, which, you know, I'm 67 years old, so I had to teach myself how to use GarageBand and how to edit.
Right.
And
I also use GarageBand. That's cool.
Yeah. Well, I had a little bit of trial by fire when I started doing my audiobook, and then I stopped doing my audiobook to do an audiobook for a friend of mine, and we published her audiobook. And so now I've got to go back to my audiobook. But that's how I sort of learned how to do the editing part. So there are other things that I need to learn about GarageBand. And yesterday I was feeling very technologically challenged about that. But fortunately, I live with a tech guy. So
Perfect.
Yeah,
That's my dad for me, but I just moved out, so now I don't have him.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So you got to get him to come over to your house or your apartment.
Yeah, if I'm having an issue. But podcasting is really good for the soul. It's so relaxing.
I think so too. Now, what you said that you started listening to some podcasts. What are the ones that you listen to?
I listen to Tell 'em Steve Dave and What Say You, and those are two podcasts with similar energies as Caps Off. You know, he told me, "Hey, listen to these two. I think you'll like them." And I listened to those, and then we had the same idea of like, this is how we want ours to be.
Yeah.
And they have they're kind of tied into like the Impractical Jokers. Is one of them is two Impractical Jokers, and the other one's tied into like the View Askew company. So that's like Kevin Smith's production company.
Oh, yes. Oh, I know who Kevin Smith is. Yeah, I like him.
I have a Clerks poster in my house signed by Kevin Smith.
You do?
I do. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I only have a signed photograph of Gregory Peck. That's mine. That's the one I have. Yeah, that's cool. That's great. I like that you found some that are sort of in the same wheelhouse as the one you're doing. That's sort of how I came to podcasting. I listened to one, it's all about books. It's called What Should I Read Next with Anne Bogle.
Yeah, you told me about that when I was in dramatic structure. I remember hearing about that. That was cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and she's been doing it since, I don't know, 2013 or 14 or so. She's much better at it than I am. But as I listen to it, it's a wonderful podcast. She has a guest and they talk about the books that guest loves, and then she recommends 3 books for the person to read next. And I thought, well, I love that, but I love movies. I love television shows. So that's why I created Story Power the way it is, because there are so many ways to get stories. And I wanted to encompass them all because I'm passionate about them all. The other podcast that I listen to occasionally is The Incomparable. And a lot of times they will like Barry and I listened to probably a 2.5 to 3 hour podcast one time when we were driving someplace. And it was about Infinity War and Endgame. And it was so interesting. And there are several people who are talking. It's like 5 people, which I find confusing. So I wanted to keep it more like, what should I read next with only one other person? So that's great. I can't wait. You'll have to tell me when you start your podcast on Apple Podcasts, and I'll subscribe to it there. I subscribe to it on YouTube.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I totally, I want to jump back. I totally understand what you're saying about multiple people on podcasts being confusing, because when I first started listening, which was like a year and a half ago at this point, was Tell 'em Steve Dave especially was, there's always 3 people. It's always the same 3 people, but every now and again they'll have like 4, 5, 6, sometimes 7 people on. And it gets really confusing because you don't know all these voices. You're not there. You can't see who's talking. But they've got like 400 something episodes out now. So you start to get used to it. But I really like just the one person, or you have your host or hosts, and you don't push too far past that,
Yeah. So you're going to do your podcast on Spotify and Apple. Tell me how you got hooked on stories and storytelling.
I don't remember one single movie that got me hooked, but I do remember growing up constantly having something playing. There was always some movie in the little VHS player. Like I had one of those really small ones that's like smaller than a microwave, and it was like a VHS player and a TV like combo. My mom put it on a little bookshelf in my closet so I could just sit on the floor and look up and watch it. And there was always something playing in there. And then from there, that evolved to toys as a kid, and having my action figures and making my own little stories out of that. And that evolved into making stop motion movies in middle school.
Wow.
And then that evolved into taking theater in high school, and then acting in dramatic structure in college with you, and then now I'm back to making my own films and competing in film competitions, shooting commercials and ads for local businesses, stuff like that.
That's cool.
So I took my little sister, she's 12, to see Jurassic Park at a local theater. They're playing like the original Jurassic Park. And so I took her there, and in a time today where I feel like people are kind of numb to them. They're like, yeah, they're dinosaurs. They're special. We've seen them all before. She was captivated, like just so like gasping when she saw the brontosauruses for the first time, and like leaning forward and staring at the screen. It was like, I'm starting to realize I can show her all of my favorite things and just re-experience them and live through her. And that's the feeling that she got watching that, the feeling that I got growing up. That's what I want to continue that's what I want to give other people.
Yes, really. Oh, I'm so glad you said that, because we have a friend from Australia. He's Australian. And he came to college we were going to college, my husband and I, in Iowa. It was a church college. So he came for a year to go to college there. And he and I had a date to go see The Wizard of Oz, and he had never seen The Wizard of Oz before.
Really?
It was so interesting to go see a movie that I had seen, 20 times or 30 times
Yeah.
with someone who had never seen it before. I saw the movie in a completely new way.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because you hardly remember your first time watching a movie. Like you remember it, but you don't have those same feelings. You tend to forget like the questions you ask, like, oh, what's this person going to do? What's this person going to do? Especially when you've seen it so many times. But when you know all those story beats and you're waiting for them to react, and you're waiting for for this moment to come and that moment to come, and then you're starting to see, like, at one point I experienced this movie this way, and I feel like I forgot about that.
Yes.
I forgot that I had this same shock and awe. Yes. I don't know. I feel like that's similar to what you were saying.
Yes. Oh, that's neat. So that's a neat thing that you can share with your sister. So I'm 13 years older than my youngest sister, and she and I are the ones that talk about movies and books all the time. And it sounds like you're quite a bit older than your sister, and that's some
8
way
years.
8 years. So that's a way that you and she can connect.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love it. Because sometimes, little siblings can be really annoying.
Yeah, don't I know it? No, but I love them. I love all my siblings. I think my older brother, him and I started sharing a room when I was like 7 or 8, because it was right before my littlest sister was born. We needed the extra room for her for the nursery. So him and I started sharing a room. So from ages like 7 to 18, for like 10, 11 years, I was living with him. So he's another one that I have such similar taste in the stories that we like. And sometimes he'll just bring one up, some new movie or some podcast, and be like, hey, I was listening to this. And I was like, no way, I was listening to that, or I watched that, and I really enjoyed it. And we have just such similar tastes now. It's very refreshing, especially now that we're not all living in the same house. When we get together, there's no fighting. There's no who's doing dishes. It's all like, what have you been up to? What do you like? What are you consuming right now? How's your brain changing?
Yeah, that's cool. I love it. So I know from conversations with you that you are a big Spider-Man fan. And I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, about what is it about Spider-Man that makes you feel so connected to him?
Spider-Man, I feel like I have been a Spider-Man fan for longer than I have been a self-aware human being. Before there was any sort of thought, like, why am I here? Who am I? There was, I know Spider-Man, there's that guy. And back then, as a real little kid, it was just a superhero on the screen. And it was cool, and that was fun. Especially, I was born in 99, so the only superhero movies that I watched were like the X-Men movies and the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. So I grew up with those kinds of things. And back then it was just superheroes. And as I got older, I started to realize there are a lot of heavy themes that come with the character. You see him struggling to pay rent, struggling with money, struggling to make the decision between right and wrong, the right thing to do, making serious mistakes and just learning how to move past them, making the choice of, do I do what I want to do, or do I do what I have to do? Because those are not always necessarily the same thing. There's a lot of lessons in choice and personal responsibility associated with that character that as I grow older, I see more and more and more, and it becomes so easy and a little fun to apply into my own life and try and live like that. It seems like every single time I read a new Spider-Man story, I learn something new that's really, really relevant and that I can apply to myself.
Well, and part of the thing that's so heartbreaking for him is he doesn't get to be with the woman that he loves because of his, well, at least not so far, because of his abilities. And that, in a way, that's how it is with almost all of the superheroes.
Yeah. It's a huge thing in comic books and comic book movies to be like, I can't let people know what I'm doing, because then the people around me are going to get hurt. Bad people are going to use them against me.
Yes. And he's so young.
Yeah, I think that's another thing. I don't know if I'll still be relating to Spider-Man. Like, yeah, that's me. That could be me under the mask when I'm like 40 or 50, but as of right now, that's me. That could be me under the
Yes.
mask.
Well, my one of my favorite characters is Captain America, and part of the reason I talked about this with my sister and with David Featherston is because I'm 67, so I have a little bit of I can stand back and get a little bit of a perspective of what's going on and going, oh, I see a little bit of the bigger picture. And
Yeah.
that's Captain America. He has that ability. Even when he's younger, he has that ability. He's not this frenetic energy like Tony Stark. Yes, I can see why you connect with Spider-Man because of all of those things that a young person has to go through.
It's neck and neck between him and the Flash. Those are my favorite superheroes. And what I
Mhm.
always like to say is Spider-Man and the Flash are characters that I can put myself onto and see in their shoes. I can be like that. Those are my favorite superheroes
Mm.
because I can see them as me.
Mhm.
But I don't think they're the best superheroes. I think their mistakes are what make them interesting. I think the greatest superheroes are Captain America and Superman.
They are my favorites. But we have to have the ones that make the mistakes too, because even in novels that I read, the people who make, because I read some young adult fiction, I read sci fi, I read fantasy, historical fiction, and you want characters that are not perfect. Even Superman and Captain America have to go through some really tough things.
Right.
you know, they're maybe a little more perfect in terms of their personalities.
Yeah, and they seem to always know like what's right and what's wrong. And I'm kind of writing a story right now that just a small
Oh,
thing that I want to work on my own, that deals with actually that exact thing of like I've grown up looking up to these superheroes,
mhm.
and it just seems like they always know the right thing to do. And sure, they make these mistakes sometimes world shaking, but
Mhm.
they always seem to just keep going. And I don't have superpowers, so how am I supposed to just keep trucking on through knowing that I just made a big mistake? And how do I get past that? How did they
Right.
do it?
Yeah.
I love that concept of
Well,
thinking
and it
like,
yeah, and that's one of the things I always say that the all of the superheroes, DC, MCU, all of those, even
mm,
Star Wars and Star Trek, they're all our modern mythology. Well, in the ancient mythology, those characters made huge mistakes, made terrible decisions
yeah,
sometimes. But that was a way for the people to do the same thing that you're talking about, is examining their own lives and things. And
yeah,
now that I'm so much older, I look back at my life and I go, oh, well, yeah, that was a mistake, but it's all just learning. When you make
yes,
mistakes, you're just learning.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's what the purpose of stories are. And I really like that you brought this up because it's something I've been chewing on for a while that I've been itching to talk to somebody about. And it's just movies today are the same as like telling stories around a campfire,
Hmm.
or way back. It's like when you learn a lesson and you put it into a movie, that's your way of teaching somebody else that lesson that you learned. So maybe they don't have to go through what you went through.
Hmm.
And I think that's what makes the movies my favorite movies. The best movies like Clerks and Chasing Amy. These are like movies about very flawed people who go through something huge, and then they're like, oh my gosh, I was wrong. I was totally wrong. And I love that. I think it's similar to just passing your wisdom down to the next people.
Yes,
I think that's the best stories, and stories that don't have that don't interest me all that
right.
much.
Yeah, they don't have any substance to them, you mean?
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm reading the book, The Hate You Give, right now.
Mhm.
Because I'm going to be talking with my niece Ariel. I was telling you about her before we started recording, and she's read the book and watched the movie, and it's devastating. It's a devastating book about a girl who she goes to a white high school. It's a private high school because her parents don't. She lives in the quote unquote ghetto part of town. but her parents do not want the children to be exposed to gangs and all of that. So all of their kids go to this private school, and it has an elementary wing part of it and middle school and high school. So she is at a party at the end of spring break, and one of her friends that she has known since they were like 2 comes and talks to her at the party. Well, there's gunfire at the party. And so he grabs her and they leave in his car, and they're just getting reacquainted because they haven't seen each other for a little while. And they had a third friend that the 3 of them hung out together all the time. Well, their girlfriend, Natasha, was killed by gang fire when she was 10. Star is the main character. She saw it. She saw her friend die. Well, she and her friend are in the car and they get stopped by a police officer. Well, it ends up he gets killed by the police officer. So she's witnessed both of her best friends getting killed by gunfire. Mm-hmm. And it's this devastating story, but the thing that's so great about it is you're in that life. You're living life with her. It's like you're there. And those kinds of stories to me are the best.
Yes.
Because you learn so much. You don't have to live it, but it's great to learn because she's living these 2 lives. She's living in this white world at her school, and then she's living in the black neighborhood, and how does she, now I'm not finished with the book yet, but how does she navigate both of those? And are they going to mesh? Is she going to have to choose one over the other? I mean, it's really interesting.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. What did you say that was called? The Hate You Give?
The Hate You Give. And it's from a Tupac rap song, I think. And the hate you give little infants F's everybody. And that the hate you give, blah, 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 spells out thug life. And the thing I love about the book is it explains the whole, this is why some people join gangs, because it's the only way they can support their family, or it's, I mean, or they get drawn into it. They get, like the kid that gets killed, he is selling drugs, but the reason he's selling drugs is because the head of the gang has done something to his mom, who's a drug addict, and he has to sell the drugs to pay the guy back, or his mom's going to get killed. I mean, he's coerced into it.
Yeah.
Now he has no drugs in the car. He has no gun in the car. So there should be no reason why he gets killed by this police officer. But she's just about to go testify before the grand jury. That's where I am in the book. So I'm going to have to watch the movie too. And I think that all the movies and stories that we've been talking about have those kinds of where the characters have to make these gut-wrenching decisions.
Yeah.
And self-examinations. So I like that you like Spider-Man. That's neat.
Yeah. Spider-Man, I feel like is there are not a lot of superheroes like I don't get that from watching Tony Stark. I just don't. Mm-hmm. There's no part of me that can relate. And sure, he goes through hard stuff and has to force himself to change, and he's a superhero just like everybody else. But it's not the same. And I have plenty of other, outside of comic books and comic book movies, plenty of other stories that I really like that share those same sort of heavy lessons.
Like what?
I really like consuming those. Like Train Spotting. Have you seen Train Spotting?
I have never seen Train Spotting. Who is in that again?
Ewan McGregor is the main character.
Yes.
And he plays a heroin addict. And it the way it paints the dangers of drug abuse and drug addiction and getting over it is sometimes it gets really, really intense. It shows some scary stuff. I don't know if I'd recommend it to somebody that I didn't know could handle it, because there's some really, really bad stuff in it. But it really opens your eyes to what these drugs do to you. How they make you feel and how you think you've got a handle on it, and you just don't. you don't have to be a heroin addict to watch this and be like, oh my gosh, and just understand it. That's probably the biggest one I can think of right now.
That's so devastating when somebody gets caught up in that. And really, they're probably not thinking that they're going to go down that road.
I think it opens up with a monologue talking about how it's the greatest feeling that you could ever imagine times 10. Mm-hmm. And that just immediately sets the tone for like, mm-hmm. and that's why you got to get more. That's why you got to keep getting more mm-hmm. and more and more. And but you see these people and they all think they have a handle on it. They all think like, yeah, we're just having a good time with our friends. I think two of them, they're living in this little flat in, I think, Scotland. I'm not positive, but they're all living in this little flat together. And two of them have a baby, and then everything just starts going wrong as they start neglecting the baby for, I have to get my high, or they start missing out on work. They don't see their families. People think they're dead, stuff like that. Yeah. That's a good movie.
Are there any others that you really like?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, plenty. I think I really like Big Fish. That's another Ewan McGregor movie. Big Fish is so... I like it for a different reason. Have you seen it?
No, but I know a little bit about it.
It's not so much as like... It's not so heavy. It doesn't weigh on you like the stories we were just talking about. It's a little more like up and bubbly and happy. And I like Big Fish because the message it gives off is the main character, played by Ewan McGregor. He sees stories the way I see stories, and that's why I like Big Fish. He doesn't make movies, but he tells his stories by telling them to his son and mm-hmm. telling them to the people around them and just blowing them out of proportion. And his son's always like, "Don't you get it? Don't you just ground yourself in reality? What's wrong with you? Just be a normal person." And by the end of the film, the son's just like, maybe it's not so bad to tell a story every now and again, to escape, to get out, because it can really change you. It can really sway you one way or the other. They're really powerful. I love that movie because of the way it paints storytelling. Yeah,
that is one that I did want to see. I wanted to see that, but we don't go to the movie theater very often. So busy.
What are your top three movies? Your top three favorite movies of all time?
Oh, well, they're classic movies, most of them. You saw one of them, Now Voyager in Dramatic Structure, because it seems like that one's a timeless movie to me because we all struggle. I believe almost everybody struggles with loving themselves. And that's the crux of that movie. And then how to deal with difficult people. Charlotte's mom is so horrible.
Difficult is an understatement.
Yes. But I love that she learns how to kind of walk this fine line with her mom. And that's one of my favorites. Another one of my favorites. Well, I have a bunch of new movies that are favorites, but I'm going to talk about the classic movies. Another one of my favorites is called The Best Years of Our Lives. And it is about 3 men coming home from World War II. And this movie's it won Oscars, but part of the reason why it's very famous is because one of the men was an actual sailor who lost his hands in the war. So he has hooks for hands.
Yes,
so he's not an actor. He wasn't an actor. And do you know this movie?
I've heard a little bit about it. I remember the part of the actual soldier with the hooks for hands. I've heard of that.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that's so great about it is it was one of the first movies that came out after the war that was about soldiers dealing with PTSD. I mean, they didn't call it PTSD then, but
it was probably shell shock or something like that, or battle fatigue, something like that.
Right. Yeah. And each of them, one was a bombardier. So he was up in the plains. One was a foot soldier. He was older. He has adult children now. He's coming home from the war. And his son is like a senior in high school, and his daughter works in a hospital. And he's a banker. And then there's Harold, who is was the sailor. And Harold wants to marry the girl next door. They've been in love since they were in high school. but
Mhm.
he doesn't think she can handle him not having hands. So he's dealing with that thing. And also, everybody looks at him weird, and people always ask, this is always sort of how they open up. Do you mind if I ask you a personal question? And then, of course, they want to ask about his hand, his
Yeah.
hooks. So he has to always deal with that kind of thing. And then Fred, the guy, the bombardier, married this girl and then was maybe had a week honeymoon, and then he had to go off to war. And they haven't
Mhm.
seen each other since. Well, she is not such a great person. She was working in a nightclub. She doesn't know how to support him. And he had this really horrible experience where they got hit, the plane caught on fire, and he had to
Mhm.
bail out. He's trying to get the rest of his crew out, but one of them burns up in the plane, and he keeps dreaming about that. Can't get over the death of the guy that he couldn't get out of the plane. And then the banker is an alcoholic. He was an alcoholic before he went to the war, but he's a functioning alcoholic. So he can hold down his job, but just integrating back into working in a bank, which to him is this kind of trivial job now.
Yeah.
And they've promoted him so that he's the loan officer. Well, he gives a loan to somebody who doesn't have any collateral, and they kind of call him on the carpet about it. But he knows that, from his experience in the war, he can tell which people are going to be reliable and going to be able to pay back the loans and which ones aren't, even if they don't
Yeah.
have collateral. So that this guy wants the money to buy a piece of land and be a farmer. And just talking with the guy, he knows, oh, this guy's going to make it. He's going to be successful.
Yeah.
So he feels really, in a way, he feels like his job is perpetuating that whole separating the poor from the rich kind of thing.
Mhm.
Because from things that he says, about certain people, oh, they're strictly TCR, top credit rating, and he's being really sarcastic about it.
Mhm.
Well, it ends up that they become friends flying home, and Fred falls in love with Al, is the banker guy, his daughter, even though he's married, because his wife she's horrible, he discovers when he gets home. And his father is an alcoholic too and lives in this really awful, trashy part of town. But there's love there. There's love between Fred and his dad and stepmom. There's no
Yeah.
love between he and his wife. She just wants him to be successful, to make money so she can have these wonderful things and go out every night and,
Ugh.
party. And Al's daughter is a nurse. Well, maybe she's a nurse's aide, but she's seen life. She's seen what's happened to the soldiers coming home. And at one point, he stays the night at their house because they've been out drinking, and everybody's
Mhm.
totally sloshed except for the women. And so he has his nightmare, and she goes in and wakes him up, and she's very kind to him, and she wipes his face and she says, "It's okay, Fred, you're going to be okay." Well, he remembers that, of course, and it's
Mhm.
exactly the opposite of his wife. And so it's like this little slice of life of
Mhm.
how they kind of reacclimate to being home. And it ends on a very hopeful note because Harold and his girlfriend, his fiance, get married, and Fred is divorcing his wife. And Fred and I forgot Al's daughter's name, played by Therese Wright, they're in love, and they're
Mhm.
going to get married, and Al is starting to kind of reintegrate back into life again. So that they're going to be okay, but it's this, I mean, there are certain scenes, every time I watch it, I cry. It just touches you so much. And then the third one that I really like, which is a classic, is The Razor's Edge with Tyrone Power. And it takes place, again, it's sort of a PTSD sort of situation. It takes place shortly after World War I. And on the very last day of the war, he is saved from getting killed by a friend of his who just stands up in front of him, and he gets shot. So it's like somebody was aiming at Tyrone Power, but his friend stood up and he's the one that got killed. And so it's like, why was he killed instead of me? So it sends him off on this like spiritual journey. Well, he's a member of this kind of rich set in Chicago, and one of the women wants to marry him. She's convinced that he's the one for her, but he's got to go on this spiritual quest. Well, of course, eventually she doesn't want to wait anymore. She wants to be rich. And so she marries another guy that's in their circle of friends. And they have another friend who gets married and has a child. Well, they're in a car accident, and her husband and child are killed, and that sends her off on this horrible downward spiral. And the book is by Somerset Maugham. So Somerset Maugham is a character in the movie and in the book. And he's observing this group of people. And of course, the one that impresses him the most is Tyrone Power's character, who just goes on this journey of self-discovery and trying to find the meaning of life. And eventually he ends up in this monastery someplace in the Himalayas. And you don't know, it's not Hindu. We don't know if it's Hindu. We don't know if it's Buddhist. You don't know.
Right.
But he has this profound spiritual experience. And in the end, he's the one that Somerset Maugham thinks is the most interesting of the whole group, because he's going to continue to be there for. He tries to help the woman whose family died. Well, the girl that he was gonna marry, who's now married and has children of her own, does something that sets her off, and she leaves. She's murdered a few months later. So Tyrone Power's character realizes that, it was his old fiance that set this all in motion for the woman to get back into drinking, and then it ends up that she's murdered. So, he's done with her. So that movie I love it. Do you have any other movies that you want to, or books or graphic novels that you want to recommend to the listeners?
Sure. I saw these last two films, these other two films that I think everybody should see. The first one's Jojo Rabbit. Both of them came out last year. Jojo Rabbit, it was up there with me for one of, if not the best films of 2019. It was so incredible to watch. And it's every moment hits, whether you're wanting to laugh or cry. Everything that Taika Waititi, the director, I think it's Waititi, he's everything he's trying to convey just lands perfectly. There's nothing about that movie that I don't love. And then the other one was The Peanut Butter Falcon.
Oh.
And that one's got Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson, and then Zach Gottsagen. And Zach Gottsagen has Down syndrome, and it's about Shia LaBeouf and Dakota Johnson's characters. I can't remember their character names. They take this boy with Down syndrome who's been passed around, and nobody wants him, and he's living in an old folks home because nobody wants him. That's the only place that he is. He runs away from the old folks home, and he kind of stumbles upon these two people, and they help him travel down to like a sort of makeshift wrestling school type thing to meet one of his retired wrestling heroes. And it's this really good story about brotherhood and how you can grow close to these people and kind of become a little family without being actually related. I think Shia LaBeouf's character is motivated by like he's got an older brother who passed away. I think he blames himself for the reason he died or something. And he sort of comes to learn that this boy that he's got with him now is sort of his second chance. Even though I felt like it was my fault, I have a second shot at having a brother. Having a little pal buddy to bring with me everywhere. It's a beautiful movie. I love that movie.
I love stories where people form these families and they're not blood related. But now, what's the name of that one again?
The Peanut Butter Falcon. That's his wrestling name.
Falcon. I love it. That's great. I do want to see Jojo Rabbit. We didn't get to go see it before the pandemic.
I think you would love it. Knowing what I know about you, mm-hmm. I think you specifically would really, really, really enjoy that movie.
Well, I'm a big Scarlett Johansson fan. I like her a lot. That's one of the reasons why. But I also like the director, and I do not know how to say his name. He is fantastic.
Yes. I've only seen the only place I'd heard him from, and I know I'm not alone. The place I heard him from was when he did Thor Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. And after that, I was like, all right, I can give Jojo Rabbit a chance. And then it just blew my mind. And now I want to get into his other work and see what else he's done. Because if they're all like that, oh boy.
Yeah, because he has this really interesting combination of humor, that he uses humor, but it's also about these really serious subjects.
I mean, yeah, Jojo Rabbit takes place in Nazi-occupied Germany.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. Do you have anything else you want to say before we stop?
Did you want to talk about the film competition?
I did want to ask about that. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, it's the film's due tomorrow. We've been working on it all week.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's for I think it's called the Skills USA. It's I think open to high schoolers, all high schoolers in Arizona or something like that. And one of our group members just graduated, so he was cleared to be a part and compete in it. And so he called us. We've got our little film crew, and he was like, "Hey guys, I want to do this." And essentially, there were 3 directors you could have gotten. You have to emulate. They just randomly assign you one of these 3, mm-hmm. and you have to emulate that director's style. Mm-hmm. And the 3 were Steven Spielberg, Nora Ephron, and Alfred Hitchcock. And we got Alfred Hitchcock, and I was like, all right, well, we've got this little story, and I'm not quite feeling it, but I know somebody who knows Hitchcock better than I do, way better than I do. And so that's when I texted you. And I think we've got a good thing going. I'm really excited. And it should be done tonight or tomorrow. I hope we don't turn it in late, but if we do, at this point, we're a little more dedicated to making it good instead of rushing to the finish. Mm-hmm. Because we've just fallen in love with it the more it's gone on. But
oh, good. That's great. Yeah. Well, I hope that you will put it up on YouTube at least, even if they don't choose you, because, you never know who's going to see it. I loved the scenario that you came up with.
Yeah. Because you came up with 3 really good ones, and I wanted to do, because I really loved all of those, and I was talking to Dylan, and I wanted to try and mash them all together. And I think I ended up taking the one that I put forth, and then I think the third one that you put out, I tried to put them together as much as, there were the 3 ideas. One was he's hiding from the authorities because he's suspected of a crime, or he has to decode the message on the radio that's coded, or he hears that someone who's about to kill him is on the loose. So I took the first 2 and put them into the one that I was thinking of, where he's hiding from not the authorities, but he's hiding from somebody who, if catches him, would try to kill him. And it's come out so amazing so far. I'm really excited.
That's great. I can't wait to see it, because I liked your idea that you took that little portion of Notorious where they're trying to figure out the whole bit about the wine. What's the deal with the wine? And then as they're messing around down there upstairs, they're running out of wine. So somebody's going to come downstairs. Yeah. That whole oh, I love that scene. Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, you can't go wrong with Cary Grant and Ingrid Bergman, in my estimation.
No, you can't. You cannot.
Yeah. And Claude Rains, everything I've seen him in, he's so fantastic.
He was in Now Voyager, right? Now Voyager.
And he played
Casablanca. Casablanca was so good. I bought Casablanca because I loved it so much.
Yes.
I bought it and I own it now.
I forgot I had him in 3 movies from Dramatic Structure. That's right. Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting movie too, because some of the best movies, and Casablanca happens to be one of these, they didn't have the script finished when they started filming. So the actors weren't quite sure how this was all going to end up. Was Ilsa going to end up with Humphrey Bogart's character, Rick, or was she going to go off with her husband? Which I love Paul Heinrich too. He was in Now Voyager as well. But, of course it's the 40s. So she has to go with her husband, but they didn't know exactly how it was going to end up. The script.
I think I don't know back then because I was 60 years from being born, but
right.
I don't know how the audiences reacted, but it hits a point where you're really rooting for Rick to be like, Elsa, come away with me. And she leaves her husband for her, which is a little like, it's one of those situations where there's no clear right choice. And it's another one of those, like much like Spider-Man, Rick Blaine has to make all these heavy just decisions about, I have this choice to make, and do I make the responsible decision, or do I make the decision that's best for me in my heart? And he makes the tough choice, and he learns it's definitely not the easy one. But
yeah, well, yes. And in that situation, trying to defeat Hitler, I guess, was more important than being happy with Ilsa.
I think there's a quote in it that's like, it's in his final little speech to Ilsa, where he says the problems of 3 people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. Yeah.
It is a good movie. I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad.
I really liked it. It did a number on me.
Yeah. Well, I was surprised at some of the ones that you guys all liked. I was really surprised that all of you liked Sliding Doors.
Oh, how could you not? You know what the Monty Python boys say. Oh, how could you not love him? And that movie was so good. I've talked about that movie to several people. I thought Gun-Shy was one that I was like, it might be. Okay, that one and Sliding Doors I watched, and I was thinking these sort of 90s, early 2000s sort of romantic comedy type movies. I was like, they're not really my thing. And then they both just flipped me upside down on my head. I really enjoyed those. It was a good selection of movies the whole semester.
Well, I'm going to end this by saying, Trevor, it has been such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for being my guest.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed this. It's nice to sit down and talk about movies with somebody who loves them, just like I do.
Yes,
it's a breath of fresh air. So thank you for having me.
Yes, and we probably could go on for hours and hours, just like my sister and I do. But I appreciate you agreeing to do this, and thanks for telling about your podcast and about movie contests that you're entering. Right?
Thanks for having me. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you liked what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the things we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thank you for listening.